Everybody loves Shamrock and Clover, and just like any good character, it's always great to just do palette swaps to continue to sell them. I mean, fighting games do it all the time. These are Polynian's 1A and 2A, both of them being labeled as the gray flesh version. These were very easy cash-ins for them to just change the color palette a little bit and cash in on those sculpts yet again. Let's just move those two for now so that we can look at the boxes. Both of them have a similar windowed display. First, let's look at Clover. As per the usual, we have the figure on one side with some film over it, and on the other side some anime drawings and some information about the character. Cute poses on the outside of the box, the side, the other side, the back, with multiple poses of the character in the new color. And similarly for Shamrock, we have the figure, there's some anime-style drawings, and some information about the character. But funny enough, the anime-style drawings are a little bit different. This is not the same Shamrock I know and love. But that's just the box, so let's take a look. We have a very lewd pose here, with Shamrock showing off all the goods in the back. The side, he's being rather seductive, and the other side, he's rather cute. Now, on the back of this one, he's put in some rather suggestive poses. Of course, I'm talking about this one in particular. Very, very suggestive, but it's the same figure that we know and love, so hey, some people like him for that reason. Now, if you were ever wondering why they did a remake of Shamrock and Clover, this is absolutely the reason why. These two characters came with basically nothing when they first came out. As I've said before, originally Shamrock and Clover only came with a separate pair of hands. They didn't even come with any additional faces, so when they got an upgrade, it was very welcomed. Now, it's very common for every Polynian to come with multiple pairs of hands and faces, as well as accessories, so I'm glad to see them evolve so far past these initial points. And with that said, I don't want to spend too much time on these since they are just simple recolors. And literally that's it, just the character with 2 additional hands. And of course, they always come with their hexagonal base, but we've come to expect that by now. And in case you were wondering, that's what Shamrock looks like inside of his packaging. Here's something you may not have known. The updated version of Shamrock actually doesn't have any eyes on his faceplate, whereas the originals did have eyes underneath the hair. So I don't know if they were just like, nobody's going to see the eyes, who cares, less paint, but I think it's nice to see that the original had a little bit more detail in at least that place. Now, important to note is that these characters only come with a pair of closed fists. And I'm not talking accessory fists, we're just talking a plain fist. Why this is important is if you prefer these gray flesh versions of the characters, that's fine and dandy, but the problem is that you won't be able to adapt them as well as you would with one of the lighter flesh versions. I say this because even the hands that come in the additional hands packages only have white hands. That, of course, is a big problem. Now, you might say, but they released additional gray flesh characters later. And yes, they eventually released Mel in gray flesh, but she only comes with 2 additional pairs of hands. Only now that we have a gray flesh version of Yana is the only way that you're going to be able to get a lot of different hands out of another character. And if so, you're going to have to sacrifice the hands from posing her to then pose these characters. I think if it's going to be a theme going forward that they're making the gray flesh versions, they really should make the hand pacts in both colors. Now let's take a look at these actual figures. They look incredibly soft with this new gray flesh, and I am absolutely loving it. Just take a look at the stomachs. They just look so much softer to me than the plain white versions. I actually like it a lot, and the high contrast from the black hair and the white hair goes really well with that skin. One thing that I regret that I can't show you is that if you have the original Shamrock and Clover, you can actually swap the hair off. You'll notice that you can actually remove all of the hair off of them. There was a bit of a peg, a fitting in the back that would allow the hair to come entirely off. They've not allowed you to do this with the newer versions of Shamrock and Clover. Those seem to be completely glued onto the head. But if you have the originals, you can make a very goth-looking Shamrock by putting the black hair on the white body, which would be pretty cute. But let's move on. We know what these characters look like. We know that they have the standard articulation, all of these ball peg joints that have a swivel, they have an in and out, and that's pretty much all the way through the figure. I'm not going to sit here and go over the same stuff that I've done with these figures before, so let's move on to something new. Now, I've talked about these multiple times, but these are the additional hand packs, 1 and 2. These were released sometime after they put quite a few of these figures out, and they realized that not all of them had all the hands that people wanted. Sometimes you would have to swap certain hand poses from some characters to others. So what better way to solve that than to release these? This set has a pair of open hands, a pair of peace sign hands that you can actually get with the newer version of Clover, and a pair of gripping hands with the finger extended as if ready to pull a trigger. Again, better than the standard gripping hands. Also, I've mentioned these in pretty much every single review. There are Polynian official figure stands. These are actually very similar to Figma stands, where they have hinge joints in each piece of the stand and a big circular base. This is the back, and on the side it actually shows you that both the head and the area above the butt both have peg holes where you can plug the stand. This, however, I was not expecting. The packaging is really good. There was actually bubble wrap around this, but if you'll notice, this is not assembled. You have screws and bolts in here where you actually have to affix them to the hinge joints. And while that's a bit of a hassle, if you have a small Phillips head screwdriver, it's no problem putting together. But now that it's together, let's see how it works. It is a standard hinge joint stand where you can move it at the base, you can move it in the middle, and of course you can pivot it at the top as well. But why would you need a stand? Of course, the standard hexagonal base is usually enough, right? Of course, if you want to do some really cool action poses, you're going to need a stand. And like I was saying, you can plug it into either the area above the butt, or you can plug it into the back of the head. Though with these older designs, I'd say that that's just a little too small to adapt to this peg. But of course, the back of the head also works just as well. And you know what? Though the hole was a bit more appropriately sized, I just tried to plug in Shamrock with this stand, and it was a little too small, so definitely heat them up so that you don't damage anything. The best thing about a stand like this is that it does avoid putting any stress on the joints. I'll say that just from having them plugged into the hexagonal bases for an extended amount of time, you will really stress the ankle joint. So if you want to keep these things in the best condition possible, maybe buy the stand. And there we have a nice action pose for our gray flesh version of Shamrock. Another cool thing about the stand is that it allows you to tighten each of those screws into that bolt so that you can make each hinge as tight as you like. This would allow them to support quite a bit of weight, so for your characters with a lot of extra accessories, it shouldn't allow them to fall. So if you're looking to get the hand sets, those are typically about $5 each, and the Polynian arm base is just around about $8, though it's hard to find any of these accessories as they do typically sell out pretty quickly, and unfortunately they don't get restocked too often. The only qualm that I have is that there's no additional sets for the gray figures. Like I said, that would be really helpful going forward, especially since there seems to be a gray version of every other character. The characters are designed in the white version first, and the gray one is thought of secondary. Now, it seems to be an inevitability, so why not make more accessories for them? I'd love to see a gray character come out first, and then have the white character adapted later. It'd be a nice way to throw things off and keep the line fresh. We all typically wind up liking the gray alternative versions anyway, so why not take a chance? But let's get back to the figures. Now, it's hard to give these characters any rating because they're basically just clones of the original, and of course we have the much superior versions that were redone later on. The cheapest I've seen Clover for is $150, and the cheapest I've seen Shamrock for is $200. These figures exploded in value for some reason, regardless of how limited they are. And I mean limited in the ability to pose and really have fun with them, because one problem I have with this set is that they really don't have much you can do. Don't get me wrong, you can pose them about and that's fun. If these are your only two characters, then sure, that's great. When these were the only two sculpts around, then yes, they were perfect. But now that we have so many more options, it's hard to recommend buying $200 figures that were normally only $60. One of the main problems I have is that there's no alternative faces. When Clover looks around, she looks really dumb because her eyes are just in one static position. So she always has this cold, dead stare, and sure, that may be more robotic, but unfortunately, it's just not natural. And sadly, it's a bit unattractive. Shamrock's a little bit easier to stomach because obviously enough, you can't see his eyes. So when he looks around, it's a bit more natural. But when you try to get Clover to look at Shamrock, she's just kind of looking in his direction. She's never really looking at him. And with no additional expressions, there's really not much you can make them do and convey. Another problem is that they only have a pair of open hands and a pair of fists. So unless they're fighting or slapping each other's butts, then really, what else are you going to do? Sure, like I said, you can go ahead and steal the parts from other figures, but that wasn't an option until recently. I feel like as these came out, they were a bit more individual and a bit more exclusive, so in their original state, they really didn't have much adaptability. That's the one thing about these figures that is great. They're universal. Any of the white robots can be interchanged. Most of the parts can be swapped from one to another. So in that respect, these ones are far inferior. But I still love them. I've had them forever. I bought them as they came out. I reserved them when they first went up, and I've kept them until now. I left them sealed, and I could have sold them for around $350 for the two of them, but of course, I had to open them. That's just me. I'm a bit more excited to open some of the later Gray figures because they have much more going on. They are, of course, later in the line, so they have more accessories, and they kind of figured out what they were doing by then. So I'm sure we'll have fun with them, but until then, I would say maybe skip these ones, unless you're rich or you find them for really cheap. With that said, thank you so much for watching. I hope you did enjoy this video. If you did, go ahead and hit the like button. If you haven't yet subscribed, what are you waiting for? Go ahead. Would you buy these figures? Add it in the comments below. But with all that out of the way, if you want to watch any other videos, I'm going to link one on screen here. If you click it, that does so much for me. If you click it and watch it, that does even more, and I'll give you a virtual hug. But that's going to do it for Figure Friday, so thanks for coming. Enjoy the rest of your day, and keep on collecting.